Welcome to Psychic Bent. My name is Carrie.
And I'm Kim. We are two sisters wanting to help other psychics learn and grow in their abilities and to help educate about spirits, angels, and everything psychic.
Welcome back, listeners, to Psychic Bent. We're very excited about this episode. It's the Halloween episode. Woo!
Yay!
Yay! Kim's been so excited that it's finally here. She's finally ready to go. And I hope you guys enjoy all the spooky stories we have for you. Some are going to be urban legend. Some are just campfire stories. And some are just popular spooky stories that we have come across in our research. So hopefully everyone enjoys this episode. And Kim, I'm going to hand it to you. Would you like to start us off on your very first story?
I would like to start the first story with a story called Resurrection Mary. And I found this one on AmericanFolklore.net, and it was originally retold by S.E. Slosser. I hope you're all ready. Buckle up. There was a dance that night at the O. Henry Ballroom, so a man slicked back his hair, jumped into his red convertible, and cruised down Archer Street, hoping he'd meet a pretty girl. He was a shy fellow who found it hard to talk to girls. Bolder men always danced with the prettiest girls before he got up enough nerve to even say hello. But tonight would be different. Tonight, he would sweep one of the girls off their feet. He was determined on this point. The dance floor was hopping when he arrived, and he wasn't having any luck at all with the beauties that lined the floor. He resolutely approached each one and asked them to dance, but they were all taken. After the latest rejection, he retreated to the bar to have a drink and gazed wistfully at the dancers. "Get on, get out there and dance," the bartender told him after his second drink. "It's not that easy," he said. "All the girls are here with their boyfriends." "Not all of them," the bartender said. "There are plenty of single girls who come to these dances, but you won't find them if you're lurking back here, so get out there." At that moment, his eyes fell upon a beautiful blonde standing wistfully at the edge of the floor. She was dressed in an old-fashioned white gown, and her skin was pale as the moon. Her blue eyes watched the dance hungrily from her position behind a tall fern, and he felt his heart beating a bit faster. Such a lovely woman should be dancing. "All right, I will," he told the bartender, swallowing the last of his drink and dropping some money on the counter. He made his way through the bustling crowd and asked if she would like to jitterbug. She looked startled by his approach, as if she had not expected anyone to notice her that night. But she readily agreed to dance with him. And soon they were laughing and dancing the jitterbug and the boogie-woogie, surrounded by happy couples doing the same. When the music slowed, he asked her name. "Mary," she said with a shy smile. She told him she lived in the Brighton Park neighborhood, not far from his own address. He smiled at his beautiful blonde and executed some fancy dance moves, suddenly conscious that her hands were ice cold, and his hand supporting her back was going numb. Some people on the sidelines gave him odd looks as he danced past with Mary. Once the couple opposite them bumped right into them as if they had not seen his partner at all. He was furious and wanted to force the man to apologize, but Mary just laughed and hushed him. When the slow dance was over, he hurried to get his fair partner a drink. The bartender grinned at him. "When I told you to dance, I meant with a partner," his friend teased him. "I was dancing with a partner," he replied, irritated by the bartender's remark. "The loveliest girl in the room." "You were dancing by yourself out there," the bartender said. He glared at the man and turned away without answering. Making his way back to the girl in white, he handed Mary a glass and asked her to sit at a corner table with him. They watched the dancers for a while. Then Mary turned and said with a sigh, "Thank you for the dance. It has been a very long time since I had such pleasure." "Let us dance again, then," he said infatuatedly, but she shook her head. "I must leave now," she said, catching up her white skirts with one hand and drifting toward the exit. I will drive you home, he said. It's just a straight shot down Archer. Not out of my way at all. She smiled and agreed. Heart pounding with happiness, he escorted her to his convertible and opened the door for her. He cruised slowly up the street, reveling in the beauty of his passenger. They were only a short distance from her street when Mary suddenly asked him to stop by Resurrection Cemetery. Puzzled, he did as she asked. To his dismay, she got out of the car. "Where are you going?" he cried. "I must leave," Mary said, turning to look at him. "Thank you for the dance and the ride." She walked to the locked gate and then faded away before his eyes. He blinked and rubbed them. Where had she gone? His heart thudded with sudden dread. "It's not safe for her to be wandering the cemetery at night," he muttered to himself. He started the car and slowly cruised the streets around the cemetery, searching for Mary, but he couldn't find her. At dawn, he drove to the address she had given him and knocked on the door. An older woman with sad eyes answered after a moment. She was still in her bathrobe. The woman was surprised to find a stranger on her door, and when he asked for Mary, her eyes brimmed with tears. Mary died in a car accident 4 years ago, she told him. She was on her way to a dance at O. Henry Ballroom when the car slid off the road. Mary was thrown through the windshield and died on her way to the hospital. She's buried in Resurrection Cemetery. Resurrection Cemetery. The place where he dropped off his beautiful blonde dance partner. He sat down abruptly on the front stoop, hyperventilating. He had spent the whole evening dancing with a ghost.
Ooh. All I could think of is visualizing some man doing the jitterbug by himself.
Yeah.
Just like,
Yeah.
that's all I kept visualizing. I'm like, oh, slow dancing by himself. Yeah, that was, yeah. So, you want me to do the clown statue?
Sure.
Now, I found this one on icebreakerideas.com, and this is called the clown statue. Now, Carrie doesn't like clowns, so I found this very creepy. Hopefully you do too, but yeah, I don't like clowns. They're creepy. So, a girl in her teens babysat for a wealthy family one night. The wealthy family had a very large house with many rooms. It was filled with lots of artifacts and old ornaments from all over the world. As the parents were leaving to go out, the father told the girl once she put the kids down, she must go down to the basement, watch TV there, and not go wandering around the house. Once the kids were asleep, she retires to the basement room to watch TV. However, she cannot concentrate on her show because in the corner of the room is a life-sized clown statue grinning at her.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yep.
Feet don't fail me now.
Right?
She finally decides to drape a blanket over the statue so she can ignore it. After a while, she can't stand looking at the clown statue's oversized feet sticking out from under the blanket. She decides to call the father and ask his permission to watch TV in another room because she is freaked out by the giant clown statue in the basement. So she calls the father, and he answers, and she tells what's going on, and he says, "Listen very carefully. Our children have been complaining about a clown that comes into their room in the middle of the night. We just thought it was a nightmare. We don't own a clown statue. You need to get the kids and get out of the house now. I'll call the police." The girl hangs up the phone, turns around to look at the covered statue, but all there was the blanket on the floor. She hears steps coming down the basement stairs.
Oh, my.
Yeah, so that's the end of that one.
Creepy.
Yep.
Okay. Oh, that one was good. So the next one I have is from the AmericanFolklore.net website as well, and it's retold by S.E. Slosser, and it's excerpt from a spooky North Carolina book.
Ooh.
Yeah. It's called Mako Ghost Light. Now, is it Mako or Mako? Do you know in North Carolina? M-A-C-O?
Mako.
Mako? Okay. All right, I figured I'd ask a North Carolinian how to pronounce it. So
It's
it's Mako.
Carolinian.
Carolinian. Oh, my goodness. Sorry about that. Okay, so this is Mako Ghost Light. Now, there was once a railroad conductor named Joe Baldwin who was working for the newly rebuilt Atlantic coastline. The year was 1867, and the railroad had expanded to include a small station in Mako, North Carolina. Joe was assigned to the very last car in the train, and he executed his conductor duties to the best of his abilities aboard his assigned car. Then one night, something went wrong. Terribly wrong. The train was heading down the line toward the tiny Mako station when Joe's car started to slow down dramatically. Worried, Joe went forward to see what was happening and realized that his car had come decoupled from the rest of the train. Joe's heart leapt into his throat when he saw the retreating lights of the train disappearing into the distance. His car was stuck on the tracks, and another train was following close behind them. With a shout of dismay, Joe grabbed his signal lantern and frantically ran to the length of the car. Bursting out of the back door, he ran out on the rear platform. Yes, he could see the next train speeding toward them down the track. By the look of it, the engineer had not realized the danger. Joe was leaned over the rail, desperately signaling for the engineer in the following train to stop, but the train barreled forward, speed unabated. Joe realized that the engineer must not have seen his signal light, or perhaps had not realized its significance. He kept waving the lantern frantically from side to side, shouting in vain over the huge rumbling force of the oncoming train. The engine grew louder and larger, and Joe's heart was in his throat as he realized the train was not going to stop. With a thunderous roar and the great shriek of massive metal hitting massive metal, the engine struck the helpless car. Joe, still at his post, was smashed between the two trains. The signal light flew wildly out of his hand, rolling along beside the tangled metal of the two trains, and miraculously flipped upright, still alit. Joe was the only fatality in the railway accident that night. Shortly after the train accident, the Mako light began to appear on the tracks near the station. People traveling on the train or crossing the tracks at Mako would report a light shining in the distance when no train was due. The light would appear as a small ball far down the tracks, and then would become closer and closer to the observer until it was the size of a lantern. People reported that the light moved back and forth frantically, as if it were signaling a train to stop, just as Joe Baldwin had done the night of the accident. The phenomenon became so common that the Atlantic Coastline Railroad ordered their engineers not to stop for the light if they saw it as they were approaching Mako. Folks believed it was the spirit of Joe Baldwin, the conductor, desperately replaying his final moments over and over again, trying to get the following train to stop before it hit his helpless car.
I've not heard that one.
I hadn't either, so.
Yeah. So I have one that it's on BlueRidgeOutdoors.com, and it's called The Appalachian Trail Ghost Story. And it was written by Brad Lane. So the story is basically written from Brad's point of view. So I'm just going to read it the way that Brad had written it. So I'm going to be saying I when it's really not me. It's how he wrote it.
Right.
Now, the Appalachian Trail, I don't know if you're familiar, is very haunted.
Mm-hmm.
There has been a serial killer for some time that randomly picks a victim on the Appalachian Trail. So I wouldn't go on that trail by myself, but...
Well, sometimes even couples that are on the trail get hijacked by a serial killer or someone wanting to do harm.
And I guess there's a chance of a serial killer anywhere you go, but you can't call 911 up on the trail. So...
Right.
Can't give your location.
That's right.
You're kind of in this area. Okay, so this particular story, like I said, it happened on the Appalachian Trail, And according to Brad Lane, this is the situation that happened that night. And he said it was late August or early September. He had a random week off and was keeping busy. He had kept a busy schedule, but having a week off was very rare. So he's getting restless, and he thought he'd blow off some stress for a bit and explore the great outdoors. On the account that I was ready for a vacation and no one else's schedule matched up for an adventure week, I decided to go at it and backpack alone for a week. It had been years since he had backpacked alone, and for some reason he had convinced himself that he once enjoyed it. But when he dropped his car at the trailhead at Catawba, which is 15 miles from Newcastle, and started hiking, he noticed a different atmosphere backpacking alone provides. And I can tell you, I've backpacked in the Sierra Mountains, and it's a very creepy vibe when you're alone,
Oh.
especially if you're psychic, because then you get that so many different animals, and you know, it's just like when you get that, you need to flee.
Yes.
You flee. But it is a creepy vibe when you backpack by yourself. So it was very quiet. He couldn't shake off how incredibly silent it was. And in his words, I could hear my own breathing, and every now and then I would look over my shoulder quickly in response to random noises. I was almost anxious to begin with, but told myself I just had to get used to the new aspect of backpacking that I wasn't accustomed to. The first night, I managed to set up camp, make dinner, and immediately retired to my tent. I was unusually exhausted, which now seems as a surprise for the little of sleep I got that night. I tossed and turned, listened to the silent night until late morning, when I finally rested my eyes. Well after daybreak, I got out of my tent and dragged my feet to pack my belongings, and it was much later than I aimed for the night before. I made it about 5 miles during the day, but it took me the entire afternoon until dark. I was tired, and it seemed without having someone to push me along on my hike, I was going considerably slower. I pitched my tent that night, filtered water, and started setting up my cook gear in the dark. It was getting pretty late, and with limited light to cook under, I decided to just eat a pack of raw ramen noodles in my tent.
Ew.
I opened my book to read.
Sorry.
I know,
Ew.
raw ramen noodles, yeah. Sure was very crunchy. I opened my book to read, but only fell asleep immediately into another half-sleep, half-wrestling match for the night. I remember at one point staring at the top of my darkened tent, not really sure if I was awake or not, and suddenly hearing a loud crunch of footsteps outside my tent. They were fast going, and as they came, but with the footsteps came something of a grumble. I couldn't be actually sure, and I couldn't distinguish any actual words, but in my mind's eye, I was sure I heard something grumbling to themselves in a deep and agitated voice. I never got out of my sleeping bag. Not inexperienced with some of the sounds at night and their magnification in the silence, I tried to convince myself it was my ears playing tricks on me. And although I managed to stay in my sleeping bag that night, I didn't fall asleep again until early morning. The next day I woke up even later and more tired than before. I made a groggy attempt at oatmeal and sat with my breakfast, unable to talk to anyone. I got my pack ready in the afternoon sun and headed out. About 3.5 miles later, I dropped my pack and sat watching the sun begin to disappear. I managed to collect a fair amount of firewood, and by the time nightfall came, I had a small fire going with a good collection of firewood piled beneath me. Under the reassuring light of the campfire, I started to become more at ease with the deafening silence of nature. I pulled a cigarette from my pocket and enjoyed a casual smoke as I put my feet up. When I tried to ditch the butt in my weakened flame, my throw was way off and it landed outside of the ash. I got up to fix my mistake and to stoke the fire when I turned around to go back to my seat, and I saw him. The light was low with my little fire, but I could clearly see a man reaching down with a scorched hand for my fire. He wore red plaid with large black burns tearing at his trim and red ashy beard that smoldered at his face. He quickly looked up, and his vacant white eyes connected with mine. He gritted his teeth and scrunched his nose towards me before quickly leaving the ring of firelight. I was shocked. I've never experienced a fear like that. I felt right onto my butt next to the flames. I looked into the forest and saw nothing but dark shadows and unclear objects, a blank wall of nothing, of everything. I didn't know what to do. I didn't even yell. No one would hear me if I did. So I did what every red-blooded American would do. I packed up my things and got the heck out of Dodge.
Wow.
I stumbled through the darkness, half of the time with my headlamp off, afraid to be seen, or even if seeing anything else. I stumbled around for hours, bumping into trees and tripping every which way. I wasn't even sure where my map and compass was. I just kept moving. I could have been hiking in circles for all I know. I was driven by my beating heart, and to this day, I know I'd never been so scared in my life. When dawn finally broke, I could see again. I kept moving. At about 12:30, I started to recognize some signs of civilization. I threw my pack down in a big open pasture, but couldn't see any houses or roads. I knew I was close to something, but I was by no means sure where I had ended up. I was almost too tired to think about it. Instead, in a fit or not, knowing what to do, but knowing I had to do something, I pitched my tent, ate a large chunk of cheese and salami. After the meal, under the afternoon sun, I almost immediately fell asleep in the grass where I ate lunch. I awoke 2 to 3 hours later, for the sun had dropped down considerably, and a funny smell filled my nostrils. I blinked a few times, and when the funny smell persisted, I shut up off my back with my heart beating to the sound of something troubling. What I saw was my tent, or what remained of my tent. For now the only thing left standing was the tent poles that dripped with oozing leftovers of my tent body. A bubbly layer of melted green plastic lay beneath the poles with a steady gray smoke still rising from the mess. I got up and felt the weight of the sky fall on my head. For a moment, I was sure I had woken up to a horrible nightmare. Without contemplating it much further, I grabbed my water bottle and ran through the empty pasture. By the time I made it to the gravel road, I was out of breath and dripping with sweat. I hastily chugged from my water bottle, wiped my mouth. Down the road, I could see a vehicle parked in the dust. I staggered forward with my hands on my side and soon realized it was a sheriff's sedan. And for the first time in a long time, I couldn't have been more happier to see a law enforcement vehicle. When I got closer to the vehicle, I noticed it was parked outside of the remains of a charred house. Nothing left standing but the mailbox out front. On the way into town, I didn't tell the officer about my experience, being afraid that he might think I escaped the loony bin, and instead asked him about the burnt-down house he had been parked in front of. The sheriff explained to me that 4 days prior, the same day I started my trip, the house was burnt down. There was no known cause, but there was an indication of arson. 2 daughters, a wife, and her husband were all in the house when the fire started, and none of them made it out. Real tragic stuff, said the sheriff, as he retold the story. I could only shake my head with the bottom jaw hanging low. Isn't that creepy?
That is extremely creepy. Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Whew. All right. This next one I have is called Ghost Handprints, and it is again from the AmericanFolklore.net website and retold by S.E. Slosser. Now, this one is from Texas. It is a famous story that took place in Texas, but I'm going to be, as Carrie did, read it in first person because somebody else was telling their version of the story that happened with them. So, here we go. My wife Jill and I were driving home from a friend's party late one evening in early May. It was a beautiful night with a full moon. We were laughing and discussing the party when the engine started to cough and the emergency light went on. We had just reached the railroad crossing where Villamain Road becomes Shane Road. According to local legend, this was the place where a school bus full of children had stalled on the tracks. Everyone on board the bus had been killed by an oncoming freight train. The ghosts of the children were reported to haunt this intersection and were said to protect people from danger. Not wanting a repeat of the train crash, I hit the gas pedal, trying to get our car safely across the tracks before it broke down completely. But the dad-blamed car wouldn't cooperate. It stalled dead center on the railroad tracks. As if it weren't enough, the railroad signals started flashing, and a bright light appeared a little ways down the track, bearing down fast on our car. I turned the key and hit the gas pedal, trying to get the car started. "Hurry up, Jim, the train's coming," my wife urged, as if I didn't hear the whistling blowing a warning. I broke out into a sweat and tried the engine again. Nothing. "We got to get out," I shouted to my wife, reaching for the door handle. "I can't," Jill shouted desperately. She was struggling with her seatbelt. We'd been having trouble with it recently. She had been stuck more than once, and I'd had to help her get it undone. I threw myself across the stick shift, and for those of you that are not familiar with that is, it is a manual transmission, and it is the gear shift that you use, and fought with the seatbelt. My hands were shaking, and sweat poured down my body as I felt the rumble of the approaching train. It had seen us and was whistling sharply. I risked a quick glance over my shoulder. The engineer was trying to slow down, but he was too close to stop before he hit us. I redoubled my efforts. Suddenly, the car was given a sharp shove from behind. Jill and I both gasped, and I fell into her lap as the car started to roll forward, slowly at first and then gaining speed. The back end cleared the tracks just a second before the train roared past. As the car rolled to a stop on the far side of the tracks, the engineer stuck his head out the window of the engine and waved a fist at us. It may have been more than a fist. You never know. Doubtless shouting something nasty at us for scaring him. That was close," Jill gasped as I struggled upright. "How did you get the car moving?" "I didn't," I said. "Someone must have helped us." I jumped out of the door on the driver's side of the car and ran back to the tracks to thank our rescuer. In the bright moonlight, I searched the area looking for the person who had helped push our car out of the path of the train. There was no one there. I called out several times, but no one answered. After a few minutes struggling with her seatbelt, Jill finally freed herself and joined me. "Where is he?" she asked. "There is no one here," I replied, puzzled. "Maybe he's just shy about being thanked," Jill said. She raised her voice. "Thank you, whoever you are," she called. The wind picked up a little, swirling around us, patting our hair and our shoulders like the soft touch of a child's hand. I shivered and hugged my wife tightly. We almost died that night, and I was grateful to be alive. "Yes, thank you," I repeated loudly to our mystery rescuer. As we turned back to our stalled vehicle, I pulled out my phone, ready to call for a tow truck. Beside me, Jill stopped suddenly, staring at the back of the car. "Jim, look," she gasped. I stared at our vehicle. Scattered on several places across the back of our car were several glowing handprints. They were small handprints, the kind that adorn the walls of elementary schools all over the country. I started shaking as I realized the truth. Our car had been pushed off the tracks by the ghosts of the school children killed at this location. The wind swept across us again, and I thought I heard an echo of childish voices whispering, "You're welcome," as it patted our shoulders and arms. Then the wind died down and the handprints faded from the back of the car. Jill and I clung together for a moment in terror and delight. Finally, I released her, and she got into the car while I called local garage to come and give us a tow home.
Ooh.
Creepy, creepy. So do you have another one you'd like to share?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
This one is called The Piggyback Ride, and it is on icebreakerideas.com.
Okay.
Okay. A married couple fought a great deal and finally began talking about getting a divorce. However, the wife discovered she was pregnant, and for the sake of the baby, they decided to give the marriage another try. The boy was born, and the family had a short period of tranquility, but before long, the old problems resurfaced, and the father and mother were fighting all the time. One night, when the boy was about 5 years old, the couple put the boy to bed and then got into an enormous fight. In a fit of rage, the father put his hands around his wife's neck and choked the life out of her. Eventually, when he realized what he had done, he began to panic. He knew he had to get rid of the body if he wasn't going to get caught. He bundled the body into the boot of his car and drove out of town to a swamp. He took the body from the car, but rigor mortis had started to set in, and it was very difficult to carry it. He slung his wife's body across his back as if he were giving her a piggyback ride, and waded out into the foul-smelling swamp. He let her go and watched her stiff hands, wretched face recede into the murky swamp water. The man went home, got in the shower to clean up, but he couldn't get rid of the foul stench of the swamp. The smell made him sick to his stomach. No matter how hard he scrubbed or how often he showered, he could not get rid of the smell. It followed him everywhere he went. As the days passed, the boy became anxious for his mother and asked all kinds of questions. The father told the boy his mother had gone to stay with relatives. The smell remained. The man began to ignore it as much as he could. One day the man noticed his son was looking at him in a very strange way. Every time he approached his son, he recoiled in horror and would not let him touch him. One day he walked into the child's room as the child was playing on the floor. "Son, there seems to be something bothering you. Is there something you want to say to me?" "Yes, father." "Is it about your mother?" "Yes." "What is it?" "Why is Mommy's face so pale?" He goes, "What do you mean?" "Why do you give her piggyback rides every day?"
Ooh.
Yeah, Mommy not in the swamp anymore.
Yeah. Wow. Whew, that was creepy.
Yeah.
Okay. So I have one that I found on the littlehouseofhorrors.com website, and it's called The Haunted Vicarage. And this is out of Sweden. So the old vicarage is known to many as the Haunted Vicarage, and it is a house in northern Sweden. Although it was built in 1876, the first ghost stories came to surface in 1927 when Vicar Nils Hedlund wrote about it in a letter. His mother, Marta, died in the house in 1907 during childbirth. The father, Per, couldn't face the fact his wife passed away, and he buried her in the backyard. When the locals found out a couple of days later, they demanded him to bury Marta at the cemetery. Per agreed, but the next day, the whole Hudland family had disappeared, along with Marta's body. Niles Hudland came back to live at the vicarage after his father died. One day he saw all of his laundry being pulled from the drying rack in the garden. There was nobody there. There was no wind on that day, and he could clearly see the laundry was being pulled. And he wasn't the last person to be affected by the hauntings. In the 1930s, another priest saw a lady dressed in gray at the house. She was walking slowly towards him through the big hall, but decided to take the turn to the expedition room. It is the office where the vicars used to work. He wanted to talk to her and ask her what she was doing inside his house, but when he got to the expedition room, there was no one there. Another woman who slept in the guest house reported that she was awakened by 3 women who were looking at her. When she turned on the light, the women were still looking, but the vision became blurry. Another chaplain recounted that he was thrown out of a chair, again by an invisible force. To date, this house is a restaurant/guest house, and should you be brave enough to stay there a whole night, the caretakers will give you a certificate, and it is a testimony of your bravery.
No, thank you.
Yep, no thank you.
That's all you get? That's all you get is a certificate?
That's all you get.
It's like, oh my gosh.
Right?
Yes. Okay, this one's called The Hitchhiker, and this is also from the icebreakerideas.com. A recently married couple were on a long road trip to the heart of the United States. One night it was raining hard, and the headlights of their car flashed across a bearded man on the side of the road hitchhiking. Not usually one for picking up hitchhikers, the husband stopped and pulled over to offer the guy a lift because the weather was so bad. The man thanked the husband and climbed in the back of the car. He seemed agitated and edgy, barely speaking a word for the whole journey. Eventually, the couple dropped him off where he asked at a crossroads. The rain was still coming down in sheets. The couple drove down for a good while, and the time had passed. The husband turned on the radio. The couple heard a news report about an escaped lunatic, considered very dangerous, who should not be approached under any circumstances. The description matched the hitchhiker, and the couple looked at each other, clearly shocked, but happy nothing had occurred. Just then, the car gave out, and no amount of keying the ignition would the car start again. The husband tells his wife to stay in the car while he sets off through the rain to try to get help. The woman locked the doors, wants to listen to the radio, but the car battery seems dead. Eventually, she dozes off. A while later, she wakes up, seeing flashing police lights through the water coming down the windshield, and a voice through a loudspeaker, "Lady, open the door, get out of the car, and run towards us as fast as you can. Do it now." The woman's confused, but she gets out of the car, her hands above her head. "Run and don't look back," the police officers ordered. But the woman is curious and turns. In the flashing blue lights of the police car, and illuminated by flashes of lightning, she sees the top of the car where the hitchhiker had a machete is hacking at the dismembered body of her husband. Blood is streaming down the sides of the car. She screams and faints as the flurry of gunshots ring out.
Ooh.
It was a creepy story.
That was a creepy story. Wow. The next one I'm going to do is called Robert. And I didn't write down exactly where I got this one from, but I will include it in our sources and the link on our Spotify page, so you'll be able to follow the story, read it there, click on it. But Robert is a very interesting doll. In 1906, a very unhappy servant who was practicing black magic gave Robert Eugene Otto a doll. They named him Robert, taken from the child's first name, because the child went by Eugene. While Eugene had the doll, his parents would often hear him talking to it and would be surprised to hear the doll talk back. At first, of course, they thought that it was just Eugene and he was just changing his voice. At the same time, their neighbors often reported that the doll could be seen moving from one window to another. They even swore that the doll was capable of eliciting scary giggles. To make things scarier, even guests would relate that they often saw Robert blink and that he was also capable of changing his expressions. Then one night the whole family awoke to Eugene screaming, and when they entered his room, all the furniture was knocked down. Eugene kept pointing at the doll and shouting that Robert did it! Robert did it! Amidst all these, Eugene still kept Robert until the day of his death in the year 1974. The ownership was transferred when their house was sold. The new owner was a 10-year-old girl. She also experienced the same things as Eugene did. In her interviews, she insisted that Robert is alive and is still trying to kill her. Now, though, Robert is residing in a museum and still continues to taunt visitors with his seem-to-be changing expression. Guests also relate that taking photos of him without Robert's permission will cause the camera to malfunction. Now, this doll is being housed in a museum where they have a lot of haunted and possessed items, and they are kept secure so they won't affect people, but it is a very, very interesting museum.
No, thank you. No, thank you. You know how I don't like clowns? I don't like dolls either.
Yeah.
They go hand in hand. Like, nope. And actually, once you got into the story, I'm like, I think I saw this doll on one of the ghost investigating shows, the
Yes,
museum.
exactly.
After,
Exactly.
yeah, I'm like, because when you first asked me if I knew the story, I'm like, no, I don't think so. And then like, oh, I do know the story.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, that was the creepy doll. Oh, yeah.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. This one was on scaryforkids.com, and this one's called The Coffin. So, this man is traveling down a deserted street in the rain, right by a local cemetery. As he passed the gate, he heard a strange noise in the darkness behind him. Not daring to look back, he quickened his pace, but the bumping noise continued behind him. He stopped and turned to see what it was. Coming down the road behind him was a coffin, standing on end, bumping from side to side. Bump, bump, bump. The man couldn't believe his eyes. Terrified, he turned and ran into the driving rain. Behind him, the coffin came faster. Bump, bump, bump. Ahead of him, there was a branch that had fallen from the tree. He reached down and grabbed it as he ran by. He turned and threw it at the coffin, but it just splintered, and the coffin continued chasing him faster and faster. Bumpity, bumpity, bumpity. The man turned the corner onto his street and ran through his front gate, the coffin right behind him. The man dashed into his house, but the coffin crashed through the front door. The front of the coffin swung open, and the man glimpsed a horrible sight of a dead skeleton inside. He ran upstairs and grabbed his shotgun off the wall display. Then he took aim and blasted the coffin with both barrels, but the shot bounced harmlessly off the coffin as it continued up the stairs. Bump, clomp, bump, clomp. The man, desperate and scared to death, jumped into the bathroom and locked the door. But he knew that was not going to work. The coffin banged against the door, and suddenly the door exploded, and the coffin came through. In desperation, the man reached out his hand and grabbed the first thing he could reach. It was a bottle of cough syrup, and he threw it at the coffin, and the coffin stopped. I couldn't resist that one.
Yeah, that was funny.
I couldn't resist. Okay, it's not really a scary story.
Okay, so I'm going to go to, I'm skipping a couple, and I'm going to go to Bell Witch Tale. Something was trying to get in. Now, this I found on www.tennessean.com, and Nicole Garton from the Tennessean is the one that did this story. Asleep beneath her quilt in 1817, Betsy Bell awoke in the dark to a sound, a knock at the door, but no one was there. Night after night, doors were pounded, windows were banged on, and the flap of wings sounded against the roof. Betsy's father and brothers would examine the house, but in the moonlight that shone on their log cabin, they found nothing. As the days went by, the sounds grew louder and more frequent until they shook the cabin with their force. Maybe they were caused by earthquakes, Betsy's father thought, but no one else in the neighborhood was affected. Maybe they were the work of scoundrels up to mischief, he guessed, but the culprit couldn't be caught. Then one night, there was a scratching outside Betsy's room, like claws scraping on the floor. It had gotten inside. Every night after that, the noise kept 12-year-old Betsy and the rest of her family awake and scared. It moved throughout the house, getting worse and worse. Finally, when we would search for a rat in our room, the same noise would appear in Sister Elizabeth's chamber, disturbing her and arousing all of the family, wrote Betsy's little brother Richard Williams Bell years later. Then one night, while Betsy huddled under her quilt, the covers slid off as if someone were pulling them. She could hear the sounds of smacking lips, gulping, and choking. Soon, members of the family regularly were having their blankets torn off. When Betsy and her brothers tried to get them back, an unseen hand would slap them. It also began to pinch them, hit them, and pull their hair. The family finally had to admit the truth. they had a ghost. Then the ghost began to talk. The voice would laugh, sing, curse, and sometimes recite prayers and sermons. The spirit seemed to like Betsy's mother, Lucy, but it hated her father, John. The ghost also seemed to hate Betsy and was especially abusive to her. Not only was the girl slapped until whelps appeared, but she started having fainting spells. Betsy would start panting or gasping for breath. Sometimes she closed her eyes and lay on as though she were dead, losing her breath for as long as a minute. Then the spells would pass and she would be fine. When Betsy felt like she couldn't take any more, her parents sent her to a friend's house to spend the night. On her first night away from home, Betsy ate supper with her best friend. They talked for a while and then headed to bed. They had just snuggled under the covers when a knock sounded at the bedroom door. Then the door flew open and a blast of wind blew out the candles. The covers were jerked from the bed. The girls jumped up to close the door and found it never had been opened. People accused Betsy of making up the ghost and creating those noises herself, like using ventriloquism, or making her voice sound like it was coming from someplace else. But soon the hauntings grew beyond anything a 12-year-old girl could produce. When a strange, nervous condition made it difficult for John Bell to chew or swallow, he blamed it on the ghost. He knew he couldn't keep his family secret any longer. Once word got out, concerned friends and curious strangers visited the Bells to hear the ranting and raving of the ghost, which became known as the Bell Witch. The witch was a torment, not only to Betsy but to John Bell. The spirit taunted and threatened him. More and more he would suffer spells and facial contortions, which forced him to take to his bed. In 1820, 3 years after the haunting began, John's sons found him unconscious. In the cupboard where John's medicines were kept, the son found a strange bottle. The witch laughed and said she gave it to him. She said he would never wake up, and he never did.
Ooh, creepy.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have another one?
I do. Do you have any more?
Yeah. I don't.
Okay.
I knew you
All right.
had. I knew you were like, this was your jam. So I'm like, I don't do it too many because I know she's got lots.
Well, I've got one more that I would like to go ahead and share. No, I have 2 more. A couple more. Let's just go for it. All right. I would like to do the one of the birth of the Jersey Devil. And this one is also from the AmericanFolklore.net with retold by S.E. Slosser, and it took place in New England. A storm was raging that night in 1735 when Mother Leeds was brought to bed in childbirth. And this is going to be her 13th child.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. The room was full of womenfolk gathered to help her, more out of curiosity than goodwill. They had all heard the rumors that Mother Leeds was involved in witchcraft and had sworn she would give birth to a devil. Tension mounted when at last the baby arrived. It was a relief, and to some a disappointment, when the baby was born completely normal. But a few moments later, before their terrified eyes, the child began to change. The room erupted with screams as the child grew at an enormous rate, becoming taller than a man and changing into a beast which resembled a dragon, with a head like a horse and a snake-like body and bat's wings. As soon as it was full grown, the monster began beating all the women, including his mother, with its thick, forked tail. With a harsh cry, it flew through the chimney and vanished into the storm. The monster of Leeds, or the Jersey Devil, as he was later called, still haunts the pines of New Jersey, wreaking havoc upon farmers' crops and livestock, poisoning pools and creeks, and appearing on the New Jersey shore just before a shipwreck.
Well, that wasn't very nice.
No, it wasn't.
That wasn't nice.
So this next one is called Pinfield Reef Lighthouse out of Connecticut. I found this on random-times.com, and it was published by Nathan. On December 22nd, 1916, just 3 days before Christmas, lighthouse keeper Frederick A. Jordan had to make a trip to the mainland and left his assistant keeper Rudolph Eiton in charge while he was gone. He anxiously climbed into a small boat and began rowing towards shore to spend the holiday with his family, whom he had not seen for several weeks as a series of storms had kept him trapped at the lighthouse. But the sea was rough. About 140 meters northwest of the lighthouse, the boat capsized in the icy waters. He managed to cling to the boat and signal for help. Eiton witnessed this and immediately took the lifeboat to try to rescue him, but he said he was unable to launch a boat against a strong wind and an outgoing tide, and so he could only witness Jordan's disappearance into the water. Jordan's body was found 3 months later. Eiton was made head keeper, and 2 weeks later saw Jordan's ghost for the first time gliding down the stairs and disappearing. One time, he saw a hazy presence coming out of the dead keeper's former room. Eiton then reported in the keeper's log that the light had been behaving strangely. One night, in the midst of a very fierce storm, he awoke and saw a phosphorescent presence in the hallway outside his room. He followed it down the stairs and found the log open to the day of Jordan's death. After 10 years of service following the death of Keeper Jordan, Eiton said, "I have seen the semblance of the figure several times, but so have the others," 2 assistant keepers, "and we are all prepared to make an affidavit to that effect. Something comes here. Of that we are positive." Many keepers have since seen Jordan's spirit, especially just before a storm or a disaster, floating in the tower or on the rocks beside the lighthouse. Eiton asked everyone who saw the ghost to sign an affidavit, not wanting to be accused of inventing ghost stories. According to one tale, it seemed that in 1942, 2 boys were fishing near the lighthouse when their boat capsized. According to them, a pale-faced man pulled them to the rocks. The boys went to thank the keeper, but realized he wasn't the one who had rescued them, and they couldn't find him when they went to the lighthouse to thank him. They later saw a photo of Jordan and recognized him as their savior. More recently, a couple in their boat, lost in the fog near the lighthouse, was guided to safety by a man in a dory, which is a flat-bottomed boat with high flaring sides. It has a sharp bow and a deep V-shaped flat surface forming at the stern. But he then disappeared. Is this Keeper Johnson still standing guard over the safety of those mariners who come too close to the reef and guiding them to safety? This lighthouse is still there. So my last one, well, I'll just go ahead with this story. Okay, so this is The Witch of Old Village. And it is from Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark by Salman Siddiqui. And this is the quiet village. In a secluded valley nestled deep within a forest, there lay a picturesque village known as Millbrook. The villagers led a quiet and contented life, and the village was surrounded by lush meadows and serene woodlands. However, Millbrook was not without its secrets, one of which was the story of a legendary witch. The legend told of a powerful witch who had once resided in the heart of the forest surrounding Millbrook. Her name was Seraphina, and she was said to possess incredible magical abilities. She was both feared and revered by the villagers for her wisdom and her enigmatic ways. Her cottage, hidden deep in the woods, was believed to hold the key to unimaginable power. Ella, a young girl with an insatiable curiosity, had heard tales of Seraphina from her grandmother. So one day, Ella decided to venture into the forest to find the witch's cottage. As she followed the winding path, the air grew colder and the shadows grew longer, but her determination pushed her onward. Ella stumbled upon a charming moss-covered cottage nestled among the trees. This was Seraphina's home. With trembling hands, Ella knocked on the door. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit room filled with an array of mysterious herbs, potions, and books bound in leather. Seraphina, a woman with piercing green eyes and a cascade of silver hair, appeared before Ella. She was neither old nor young, and her aura exuded a sense of otherworldly wisdom. She welcomed Ella and sensed the girl's curiosity, offering to teach her the ways of the craft. Ella returned to the village with newfound knowledge and a sense of purpose. She spent years learning from Seraphina, who became a mentor and a friend. She honed her magical skills, and the villagers came to respect her as a healer and protector of the village. As Ella's powers grew, so did her fame in the village. Millbrook prospered, and the villagers felt safer than ever before. However, a growing darkness in the forest hinted of a looming threat. Strange creatures appeared on the outskirts, and the once serene woods became foreboding and perilous. The village council grew anxious, blaming Ella and her association with the legendary witch for the newfound troubles. They feared her power and her connection to Seraphina, labeling her as a threat to the village's safety. One fateful night, the council, fueled by fear and superstition, framed Ella for the dark happenings in the forest. They accused her of being a witch and cast her into a hidden cave deep in the forest, sealing the entrance with powerful spells to ensure she would never return. Trapped in the cave, Ella was filled with despair. She called upon her magic and attempted to break free, but her efforts were in vain. Just as hope seemed lost, an ethereal presence emerged from the cave walls. It was Seraphina, who had sensed Ella's distress and came to aid. Seraphina revealed that a powerful dark sorcerer had infiltrated the forest, bringing chaos and evil creatures with him. Ella's imprisonment had allowed the sorcerer to gain strength and control over the woods. Together, Ella and Seraphina devised a plan to rid the forest of this malevolent force. Ella and Seraphina emerged from the cave, wielding their combined magic. The forest came alive with their power, and they confronted the dark sorcerer in an epic battle that raged through the woods. The very earth shook as their spells clashed, creating dazzling displays of light and shadow. The battle was fierce, and the outcome was uncertain. In a final selfless act of sacrifice, Seraphina used her own life force to weaken the dark sorcerer's powers, allowing Ella to deliver the final blow. The sorcerer was defeated, but Seraphina paid the ultimate price. With the threat eliminated, the forest slowly returned to its tranquil state. Ella, forever grateful to Seraphina, became the guardian of the woods and the protector of Millbrook. She ensured that Seraphina's legacy lived on, using her knowledge and wisdom to guide the villagers and preserve the balance between magic and reality. The legend of the Witch of Old Village lived on, becoming a tale of bravery, sacrifice, and the enduring power of magic. Millbrook thrived once more, and the villagers learned that true power lay in wisdom, unity, and the courage to confront the darkness within and without. And so the enchanting tale of the Witch of the Old Village was passed down through generations as a reminder that in the face of adversity and fear, true magic is found within the heart and the strength of one's convictions. And that's it.
That wasn't scary.
I know, I wanted to end it on a very good note there.
It sounded like it'd make a good movie, though.
Right?
I can visualize this as a movie. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like a good movie idea.
Right. That's what I thought whenever I read it for the first time. I was like, oh, wow, I could really see this happening, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I was visualizing. I'm like, well, this is more like a movie, you know. Uh, well, I hope everybody enjoyed our episode today, our Halloween special, or I guess we can call it a special, I don't know, our Halloween episode. Kim, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think we're good. But if anybody does want to send stories, to continue sending stories in to us, we'd still love to receive them, and any questions or comments you may have, you can send them to psychicbent1@gmail.com. If we get enough of them, we may have another special episode in between the Halloweens.
Well, thank you, listeners, for tuning into this fun episode. Kim and I had a lot of fun doing the research, and it was hard to pick which stories to tell because there's so many.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, and please like our Facebook page, Psychic Bent Podcast, and follow us. And thank you so much for listening. Bye.
Bye. May your light shine bright.
Thank you so much for listening to our podcast, Psychic Bent. If you enjoyed Psychic Bent, please like, follow, rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. We can be reached on Facebook at Psychic Bent Podcast. Our email address is psychicbent1@gmail.com. May your light shine bright.